Where is NATO this morning in this debate?
It's difficult, Tom. So you've mentioned it a couple times, and we've talked about it before. NATO is 28 nations. It's a complex group of nations that have different interests. What they've been doing, basically, and what they announced yesterday, is they are going to give the green light to a rapid reaction force, basically keeping a focus on Eastern Europe. Now, this is a big deal. This is something that's been talked about for the last 7 or 8 months, starting with the NATO summit, I think back in about September of last year in Wales. So the fact that they're actually green lighting this, the European nations will take turns leading this rapid reaction force and this force in the area is a big deal. It matters, and it's another thing that will put pressure on Russia. I think the big concern from a number of NATO countries is how far can you push NATO, push policy side on NATO without Russia having some type of drastic response. At this point in time, when you talk to U.S. officials, Tom, they don't feel like Russia can do much more than what it's doing right now, so they want to take any lever they can and pull it to try and add more pressure to them.
Yeah, although, Phil, I would just note that I don't think we're actually telling viewers enough just how threatening these rapid response centers lined up on the eastern border with Russia and Europe do really look to Vladimir Putin. That said, we spoke to Ryan Chilcote from Moscow earlier in the show, and he said essentially the strategy is for Putin to try to drive a wedge here between the U.S. and his European allies. And to what Brendan just said about Joe Biden saying Putin cannot redraw the map of Europe, it's interesting because Francois Hollande just yesterday said there is war on the doorstep of Europe, suggesting that perhaps Ukraine he doesn't consider core to Europe. My question is simply, do you think there is daylight between the policies of the U.S. and the policies of Europe vis-a-vis Ukraine?
At this point, no. And I think this is where the president's looming decision on whether or not to provide lethal arms to Ukraine is a really big deal. Look, Angela Merkel has said flat out she does not think it's good policy. French leaders, French officials have said they don't think it's good policy, though they won't stand in the way of it. The White House, top officials, including the president himself, are not sold that this is good policy. But there's so much pressure on the U.S. right here. If the U.S. decides to move forward on this unilaterally, they are not going to have European support. The biggest issue the president has been trying to confront over the last year has been keeping his European allies with him every step of the way. It's why the U.S. hasn't gone further on sanctions so far. If they make this decision to go forward on lethal arms, they're splitting, and that might be exactly what Vladimir Putin wants.